Summer 1943 dawned over Okinawa like a whispered warning, though no one heard it as such. The sun stretched lazily over the mountains, casting a gold-tinted haze across the rice paddies and narrow dirt roads of the village of Nakagusuku. Mist lingered in the low valleys, curling around stone lanterns and wooden fences, softening the edges of the world in a deceptive calm. Children chased one another between homes, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the uneasy hum of distant military activity. Chickens clucked and pecked at the ground, oblivious to the clouds of tension gathering beyond the horizon. Lieutenant Hideki Sato adjusted his uniform, the fabric clinging to sweat-slick skin beneath the Okinawan sun. He stood near the anti-aircraft emplacements, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the sky for even the faintest hint of American bombers. His jaw was set, every muscle taut with the discipline drilled into him by years of training, yet a subtle tremor betrayed his worry. He had faced exercises, simulations, even intercepted messages suggesting the Americans' growing reach, but nothing prepared him for what might come. His superiors demanded confidence, but in the quiet moments between commands, he could feel the fragility of the world he was tasked to defend. Several hundred miles above, Captain James Harrington ran a hand through his dark hair, squinting at the small formation of B-29s resting on the tarmac at Guam. The roar of engines and the metallic scent of aviation fuel filled the air, a prelude to destruction yet disguised as routine. Harrington's eyes swept over his crew, lingering on Lieutenant Samuel O'Neill, who meticulously adjusted the sights on his bombardier station, and Sergeant William Cooper, whose hands moved like a pianist over the plane's maintenance panels. Harrington allowed himself a dry smile, muttering under his breath that if only the locals could appreciate the technical precision of his squadron, perhaps they would not be so terrified in advance. The irony tasted bitter, even as he tried to temper his unease with humor. Back in Nakagusuku, Nurse Aiko Tanaka tended to a small cluster of civilians injured in a recent skirmish along the coast. Her hands moved quickly, carefully, yet her mind wandered to the whispers circulating through the village. The Americans were coming. She had tended to bombs' aftermath before, in smaller engagements, but the rumors spoke of a scale she could scarcely imagine. Her gaze fell on the children hiding behind her skirts, wide-eyed, clutching what little they owned. Every day she reminded herself that survival often required a balance of calm reassurance and quiet terror. The tension between these two worlds, one bracing for flight and destruction, the other unaware of the precise shape their lives might take, formed a fragile thread stretching across the Pacific. Harrington, Sato, and Tanaka each lived in its pull, unaware that the thread would soon snap. Each measured the hours differently, one by routine checks and mission schedules, one by the rising sun and its reflection off the waves, one by the heartbeat of children and the shivering fear of the innocent. Aiko caught sight of Elder Hiroshi Nakamura seated under a withered banyan tree, carving a small wooden bird. He paused mid-stroke, frowning as if he sensed the shadow of the storm before the sky had darkened. "Even the birds," he murmured to no one, "seem restless today." His words floated in the warm air, a quiet acknowledgment that instinct sometimes grasped the truth the mind could not. In the villages, in the barracks, and in the cockpit of distant B-29s, life continued in its fragile patterns, each person straining against an unseen weight. The sun climbed higher, washing everything in harsh clarity, as if the world itself demanded attention. Soldiers and civilians alike felt the subtle vibrations of inevitability, a distant hum, a whisper of engines not yet heard, a shadow of fire not yet fallen. And so, as the children ran through the rice paddies and the chickens pecked undisturbed, the stage was set. Lieutenant Sato adjusted his binoculars one last time, Captain Harrington's crew checked their instruments, and Nurse Tanaka straightened her apron with a small, weary sigh. The calm was complete, deceptive, and cruelly brief. The air hung thick with anticipation, though none of them could name it yet, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Because in a few weeks, the sky would fall, the earth would tremble, and the lives of those beneath it would be written in smoke, fire, and ash. But for now, the world was quiet, beautiful, and utterly unaware of the storm about to descend. The sky over Okinawa began to hum with a strange, distant rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that promised neither comfort nor warning. At first, it was subtle, a low whine that mingled with the cicada's drone, easily dismissed by villagers as ordinary summer noise. But Lieutenant Hideki Sato, perched atop his anti-aircraft battery, knew better. He raised his binoculars, scanning the haze above the horizon, feeling the first prickling sensation of dread. The American B-29s were on their way, thousands of miles from home, each carrying death folded into cold metal shells. High above, Captain James Harrington's formation sliced through the clouds with precise elegance. The B-29s gleamed in sunlight, silver birds of war vibrating with the pulse of a colossal creature. Lieutenant Samuel O'Neill gripped the bombardier's controls, the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. Each 2,000-pound bomb was not just ordnance, it was a calculation, a promise, a terror bundled into steel. Harrington leaned over, offering a faint, ironic grin. "Think of it as sending postcards," he muttered. "Only the ink is fire and the message never gets returned." Below, Nurse Aiko Tanaka's routine was broken by the sudden, unnatural roar overhead. She paused, spoon hovering above a bowl of rice, and felt the hair at her neck prickle. Children scattered, clinging to her skirts, as the first shadows of bombers darkened the sun-dappled fields. Elder Hiroshi Nakamura squinted upward, lips pressed into a thin line. "The sky carries no birds today," he murmured, and even the chickens froze in tense silence. The first bomb fell like a star plummeting through clouds, shrieking as it cut through the air. Sato's men scrambled to adjust the anti-aircraft guns, sweat stinging their eyes as they fired at an enemy that seemed impossibly distant yet unbearably close. The impact tore through a rice warehouse at the village's edge, splintering wood and hurling dust like smoke from a forge. The villagers screamed, a raw chorus of disbelief and terror. Aiko pressed herself against a splintered wall, clutching two children, feeling the vibrations thrumming through the earth as though the island itself shuddered in pain. Inside the B-29, O'Neill felt the familiar tightening of his chest, the ironic pang of guilt soldiers carried like a shadow. Harrington's voice crackled over the intercom, "Steady now. Precision counts more than haste." He adjusted his goggles, eyes catching the reflection of distant fires blooming across the island. William Cooper, hands steady as ever, murmured a dry observation. "Someone should tell the locals the 4th of July's not for another year." A faint, grim humor, but it could not mask the gravity hanging over them. The bombs continued to fall, each a silent messenger of devastation. Paddy fields turned to molten scars, wooden homes splintered and vanished, and cries of the living mingled with the thunderous echoes of destruction. In the hospital tent, Aiko moved like a shadow, dragging debris from the wounded, whispering encouragements that felt fragile against the roar of falling metal. Even Sato, trained to face the enemy without hesitation, found his hands trembling as the ground trembled beneath him, as if the earth itself were pleading for reprieve. Amid the horror, small sparks of humanity flickered. Aiko reached a child hiding beneath a collapsed wall. Their small hand gripped hers, grounding her in reason for defiance. Harrington's crew spotted a lone horse fleeing a farmstead, its panic mirrored in the eyes of the bomber crew, who could not look away. Sato's gaze lingered on a single smoke plume rising from a farmhouse. A woman's figure waved, desperate and defiant. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the island had been rewritten in fire and shadow. The B-29s banked away, engines thrumming with mechanical obedience, leaving behind a landscape scarred and trembling. Lieutenant Sato lowered his binoculars, lips pressed into a hard line, whispering a vow that the coming hours would demand everything. Aiko, knees scraped and face streaked with soot, pressed her hands together, praying survivors could find breath amidst the smoke. High above, Harrington allowed himself a quiet exhale, knowing the work of destruction had begun, but the story of courage, terror, and survival was far from over. The sky had shattered, and beneath it, the island held its breath, waiting for the next wave of fire to write the next chapter. The earth trembled under the relentless rhythm of falling metal. Each explosion rippled through Okinawa like the pounding of a drum, a percussive reminder that life and death had been measured, calculated, and dropped from the sky. Lieutenant Hideki Sato braced against a splintered fence, the heat of the infernos tangling with the sweat running down his face. His hands moved instinctively, guiding his men to fire at the advancing bombers, yet his mind churned with a gnawing unease. The precision drills of months and years dissolved into chaos, each decision a knife edge between futile action and survival. In the village, Nurse Aiko Tanaka darted from collapsed building to collapsed building, dragging survivors free of rubble, the smoke stinging her eyes. She moved with a quiet urgency, aware that every second could be the difference between life and death. A child's cry cut through the thunderous explosions, a raw, jagged note of fear, and she paused to cradle the trembling figure, whispering reassurances that sounded fragile even to her own ears. She had tended to injuries before, yet never had the world seemed so impossibly fragile, the line between protection and helplessness so impossibly thin. High above, Captain James Harrington's B-29 formation traced a deadly arc over the island, the engine's deep hum now a constant companion to the human agony below. Lieutenant Samuel O'Neill focused on his bombardier's sight, the weight of his task pressing against every muscle. He knew the accuracy of each 2,000-pound bomb was precise, yet he could not escape the knowledge that precision did not soften the screams or shield the innocent. Sergeant William Cooper adjusted the instruments beside him, muttering dryly that war had a habit of looking nothing like the movies, but even his wry humor could not mask the tension vibrating in the cabin. Amid the chaos, stark contrasts emerged. In one alley, Sato's men fired at aircraft while shielding villagers with their own bodies, discipline meeting humanity in a tense dance. In another, Aiko knelt beside a small fire, using the heat to cauterize a wound, grim determination painting every movement. The earth shuddered beneath them, yet life pressed onward, a mother tugging her child through dust, a farmer salvaging tools from a shattered barn, even a stray horse skidding across scorched paddy fields. Destruction was absolute, but courage manifested in acts so small they almost seemed invisible, yet each one carried the weight of defiance. The bombs tore through the village in relentless succession. Roofs collapsed, walls disintegrated, and clouds of smoke and dust swallowed streets whole. Sato barked orders, his voice tight with authority and fear, guiding civilians toward makeshift shelters. His confidence was a mask, worn carefully, as his heart clenched at the sight of houses obliterated and children scattered. In the hospital tent, Aiko's hands moved with practiced precision, cleaning wounds, applying bandages, offering water. Every action was a rebellion against the chaos, a whisper that the human spirit might endure despite the carnage. Above, Harrington watched the patterns of destruction unfold like a grim mosaic. He saw Sato's men directing villagers, saw Aiko's resolute movements among the smoke, and felt the tension in his own chest ease, not from relief, but from recognition. There was bravery in these small gestures, a quiet insistence that life could assert itself even against the thunder of falling bombs. Cooper's voice broke the silence, low and ironic. Seems the more things fall apart, the harder people cling to the pieces. Harrington allowed a thin, grim smile. The observation was bitter, but it rang with truth. And yet, amid the horror, moments of human connection shimmered like fragile lanterns. Aiko pressed a child's hand into an adult's palm, guiding them to safety. Sato paused to steady an elderly woman trembling near the rubble, his usual rigidity softened by necessity. A distant plume of smoke drew Harrington's gaze, and he noticed a small group huddled together on a hilltop, silhouettes against fire, refusing to be broken by the storm. Life and death intertwined here, chaos and courage braided into every action. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the tremors of bombs slowed, leaving only the quaking remnants of the land and the pounding hearts of survivors. The villagers, soldiers, and Americans alike bore witness to the fragile balance between destruction and endurance. Sato lowered his hands from his gun, shoulders heavy but resolute, knowing that the night would demand even more. Aiko gathered the children she could, offering what comfort remained, and Harrington's formation banked westward, engines thrumming, leaving behind an island trembling but alive. The earth had shaken, the sky had roared, and amid it all, courage had etched itself into every shadow, every footprint, every pulse. And though the night promised new trials, the resilience of the human spirit, fierce and unyielding, had already begun to assert itself. Dawn crept over Okinawa in muted shades of gray and gold, as if the sun itself hesitated before touching the land scarred by fire. The air was thick with the acrid taste of smoke and charred timber, a bitter perfume that clung to hair, clothing, and lungs alike. The island lay in a silence more profound than night, the echoes of the previous day's inferno still vibrating faintly beneath the soles of survivors' feet. Lieutenant Hideki Sato moved cautiously among the ruins, eyes flicking over collapsed homes, splintered walls, and scorched rice paddies. Each step carried the weight of responsibility and failure, a gnawing reminder that no drill, no calculation, had prepared him for the scale of devastation. Nurse Aiko Tanaka knelt in the wreckage of a small schoolhouse, cradling a child with a scorched arm. Dust clung to her sweat-streaked face, mingling with tears she had no time to shed. Her hands, steady through months of smaller horrors, trembled now against the enormity of this ruin. "We survived," she whispered, though even her voice sounded uncertain, swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. She scanned the horizon for any sign of Lieutenant Sato's men, their disciplined order the only remaining tether to hope amidst chaos. High above, Captain James Harrington piloted his B-29 over the island, the engine's deep hum subdued against the vast silence below. He surveyed the destruction with a soldier's precision and a human's uneasy conscience. The bombs had fallen exactly as ordered, the missions executed with mechanical perfection, yet the sight of flattened villages, rising smoke, and scattered survivors gnawed at him. Harrington knew the war demanded such measures, yet he could not entirely silence the voice that whispered of cost, of lives suspended in ash and memory. Elder Hiroshi Nakamura emerged from the ruins of his family home, leaning heavily on a splintered wooden cane. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, swept over the charred earth. He traced a hand across the scorched ground, as if reading a story etched into the soil itself. "The island will breathe again," he murmured to no one in particular, though his words carried the weight of ritual and stubborn hope. Aiko looked to him, drawing strength from his quiet resolve, and Sato, at a distance, allowed himself a brief nod of acknowledgment, a rare admission of shared understanding across the gap between soldier and civilian. Amid the ruin, small acts of defiance against despair began to surface. Aiko lifted children from the rubble, dusting them off, whispering reassurances like fragile talismans. Sato organized teams to clear paths through collapsed buildings, not as an officer commanding troops but as a man grasping for redemption in the smallest gestures of protection. Harrington circled above, noting the survivors moving among the scars of their village, and allowed himself the briefest wry smile. The stubbornness of life refused to be extinguished, even beneath the shadow of war. The landscape itself seemed to mirror this tension between destruction and resilience. Blackened beams jutted skyward like the ribs of a giant beast, rice paddies smoldered in streaks of white ash, and smoke spiraled lazily into the pale morning. Yet in narrow alleys and crumbled doorways, children laughed quietly as they retrieved pets, neighbors shared water, and a single wildflower poked defiantly through cracked earth. The island was wounded, but it was not defeated. Harrington's flight crew prepared to return to base, engines thrumming with steady rhythm, yet their eyes lingered below. O'Neill caught sight of Sato directing survivors toward a safe path, the lieutenant's posture rigid yet attentive, an echo of discipline shaped now by compassion. Cooper, ever pragmatic, muttered quietly, "The world doesn't care what we do up here, but down there, people care enough to keep moving." Harrington let the comment rest, understanding it to be true. War was measured in tons of steel, but humanity was measured in breaths and steps. As the sun climbed fully above the horizon, a quiet moment crystallized into symbolic clarity. Aiko guided a child's hand to plant a seed in the scorched earth. Sato observed, a subtle tension in his shoulders easing for the first time since the bombs fell. Harrington, high in the sky, glimpsed the fragile gesture and felt the war's immensity shrink, if only for a heartbeat, into a single act of life. The island, battered and blackened, seemed to hold its breath with them, as if acknowledging that even amidst devastation, the human heart could insist upon survival. The climax came not in another explosion, but in the resonance of resilience itself. Smoke rose in lazy columns, sun gilding ash like molten silver. Every flattened building, every shattered wall, became a marker of endurance rather than only loss. The people of Okinawa moved through the wreckage, each step a defiance against annihilation, a testament to the stubborn, terrible beauty of survival. In that quiet, cruel, luminous morning, the story of fire and courage, terror and hope, reached its symbolic peak. Destruction had visited them, but it had not claimed their will. And as Harrington banked for the long flight home, Sato straightened, Aiko steadied the children, and Elder Nakamura whispered a final truth into the wind. Even after fire, life bends toward light. The sky had shattered, the earth had trembled, yet dawn had come, and with it, the promise that the human spirit, like a seed in scorched soil, could endure.